Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video giving you the extra contextual understanding and information concerning the war in Ukraine. Where should we start today? Well, I'm going to go actually to Putin. Let's go and listen to Putin and see what he has to say at a very interesting speech or chat that he gave to reporters. It's interesting because one, he's drinking, two, he's swaying. There are some claims that he was drunk, almost reminiscent of Boris Yeltsin at the end of his sort of leadership. But he also admits to striking at civilian infrastructure, which could be an overt admission to a war crime. So really, fascinating, could have ramifications. I'll read out what he says. Right now, there's been a lot of noise about our attacks on the energy infrastructure of the neighboring country, being Ukraine. Yes, we're doing it. But who started it? Who hit the Crimean Bridge? Who blew up the power lines from the Kursk nuclear power plants? I'm just going to interrupt you, Putin, there for a second. Who invaded Ukraine? Only because really you started it. Hashtag just saying. Who isn't supplying water to Donetsk? Not supplying water to a city with more than 1 million people is an act of genocide. No one has ever said a word about it. Total silence. But as soon as we move and do something in response, they scream and shout to the whole universe. This will not interfere with our combat missions. So there you go. Thanks, Putin. Interesting point about, water being cut off to Donetsk. But then, it's what a bizarre scenario that, okay, you occupy Donetsk as a city, okay? And what? It's incumbent upon another, now what you think is another country, to supply you with water and electricity. So that's a complete nonsense. They have every right not to supply water to Donetsk. You have occupied the city and claim it is now part of Russia. Are you demanding that Ukraine has to provide money, taxes to you? Electricity straight into Russia? Water to Russia? Free grain? I mean, what? Just absolute nonsense. It's the sort of stuff that makes me just want to shout at Putin, because he is just a monumental douchebag, and that doesn't do enough justice to the fact that he's a murderous, narcissistic dictator. Anyway, interesting footage has come out of the Switchblade 300. The Switchblade was supposed to be this game changer months and months and months ago when the US gave it to Ukraine, but actually it seemed pretty ineffective against anything other than people, which is understandable since that's what it's designed for. People were thinking it's this kamikaze drone that's going to take out tanks and APCs and whatnot, and actually it was never designed for that. The Switchblade 600 can do that. This is for taking out people, and really only individual people, maybe two people if they're standing close together, and even then not necessarily kill them type thing. Here's some footage of a Switchblade 300 in action, or a couple of bits. Take off the music. Here's the operators. There you go. That's them. And then here is one, targeting in on some people there. You don't see anything dodgy here because it cuts out, but there you go. And as you can see, this person is still alive. So even then, the Switchblade 300 isn't necessarily, the big game changer that people think it could be. It's not that. However, it can injure people and take them out, or some people say injuring people is actually worse than killing people because you need people, other soldiers, to then get taken out of action to recover that person, and then they have to be taken to hospital, and all the logistics and the resources involved in sorting out an injured person is actually greater than someone who's dead. So there is that. I think these are probably more useful for taking out strategically or tactically important people, maybe for attacks on, I don't know, so, head of or commanders, commander control, people involved in that. Um, High up politicians maybe in cities or whatever. You can imagine them being used to for those purposes. But anyway, I showed that because that's the first real footage of Switchblade 300s that we had, since we know that they've been given a whole bunch more. um, a base for repairing Ukraine's Western war equipment has been opened in Slovakia, especially for overfired Panzerhaubitze 2000s. So these are the self-propelled guns that the Germans have provided that are the best in the world. However, they weren't really designed to be fired 8 gazillion times a day. So they're finding that they are in need of quite a lot of pretty significant maintenance. So Germany and the German tank manufacturer Krauss-Maffei, or Wagner, is organising a repair facility in Slovakia, 25 kilometres from the front line, I believe, from the border, sorry, particularly to repair these Panzerhaubitze 2000s, but other pieces of kit as well. So that's really good. There have been talk about this quite a lot. And there are other places. I think there's a place in Poland and Lithuania are taking Panzerhaubitze 2000s. They've agreed to fix 12 of them. I think they've probably fixed most of them already. So to talk about Germany again, they've confirmed the delivery of 24 new self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. Dezeit writes. The head of the Defense Committee of Bundestag, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, informed about the shipment of another batch of weapons. So wow, 24 new SPGs. I wonder which ones they'll be. Probably not Panzerhaubitze 2000s, but some other NATO one. Also added that in the near future, Germany will transfer 6 or 7 Gepard self-propelled guns to the armed forces. These are probably the ones that they were refurbishing that had been languishing in stores ready to be destroyed, and they pulled them out to use them again. There you go. Here is some footage of Peppa Mig. So this is a call sign Peppa. He is a pilot in a MiG, and this is this pilot doing some seed operations, suppression of enemy air defense through. We know that because he's releasing harm missiles that will pick up on radiation of radar installations and take them out. And it's just interesting to see various footage of pilots doing their thing. And there we go. This is Peppa Mig flying a MiG and shooting at things. But it's representative of the fact that Ukraine still have a meaningful air force, and we're over 9 months, 10 months into the war, where that air force should have been taken out straight away by Russian seed, their own seed operations, suppression of enemy air defense. Here's a Ukrainian helicopter, a Mi-17, flying. Just thought I'd give you a couple of bits of flying footage over the beautiful snowy trees of Ukraine. Anyway, that's the inside of a Mi-17 helicopter. Now let's move on to. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Manstein Matrix. I didn't talk to you. There was Captain Arty Green, a Ukrainian captain from around Bakhmut, saying that the Ukrainians themselves were having issues with poor leadership. And he referred to the Manstein Matrix and about the 4 different behavioral traits you can have. And this is based on, I think, a German, Erich von Manstein. Some say it's Erich von Manstein, others believe it was Kurt Gebhard Adolf Philipp Freigar von Hammerstein-Eckward. But, I just thought I had to say that name. Anyway, what is this? How is this a way of being able to evaluate the competency and the traits of, in this case, military leaders? But actually, people have used this within business. So this has been modeled for effective management. Groups are set out as follows. There are four broad groups: clever and diligent, stupid and lazy, clever and lazy, stupid and diligent. So for the purposes, we'll credit von Hammerstein Eckward with the quote. So there are clever, the quote is, surprisingly stupid and lazy officers were not seen as the worst of the bunch. So stupid and lazy aren't the worst, which is interesting. One must beware of anyone who is stupid and diligent. He must not be entrusted with the responsibility because he will always cause only mischief. This probably applies to those who are diligent but uninformed as well. The problem being that any work done by these people is unnecessary or pointless. They simply need to be pointed in the right direction by someone else to make their hard work worthwhile. Most surprising to me, however, was that those who are both clever and lazy are apparently quite good to have around. Anyone who is both clever and lazy is qualified for the highest leadership duties because he possesses the intellectual clarity and the composure necessary for difficult decisions. In other words, if you're like a bit like a Tigger and you want to just get involved and throw yourself into these, you come up with great ideas and just throw yourself into those ideas without being a bit lazy and just saying, "Oh, let's think about this a little bit more." Then you can make bad decisions, or just rush into things, where fools rush in. Laziness seems like a terrible trait to have, but according to those two military leaders, it depends on what other traits it's paired with. In particular, whether someone is both lazy and clever. How can that be good for us, and why do such people make excellent leaders? As you saw in the quote above, so that was the actual quote I was reading from there. Von Hammerstein Eckward believed people who are clever and lazy are good at making difficult decisions. This comes from their desire to make everything simpler and easier while having the mental clarity to find out clever ways to do so. Clever, lazy people often have the following characteristics which make them good leaders. They avoid busy work, such as pointless meetings. They delegate to others to get things done. And they focus on the essentials required to move forward rather than being distracted by unnecessary extras. So those three things together are seen as methods that are implemented or utilized by clever people who also happen to be lazy. The result is that as leaders, these people can be more efficient and productive than they would be in a more routine low-level position. Why being clever and hardworking isn't the best combination. So at first glance, it might seem like being both clever and diligent would be the best combination you could hope for. While it's not necessarily bad, von Hammerstein Eckward actually allocated these people to his general staff, or what might be similar or middle management today. The difference in these people who aren't lazy is that they're more likely to follow instructions and simply work hard at what they're told to do. Those who are clever but lazy tend to question existing processes and look for ways to streamline their work rather than simply getting it done. Clever and lazy people often don't mind standing out by asking questions and trying out new approaches, whereas many clever, hardworking people simply want to fit in. Really fascinating. So for those who are clever and hardworking, however, being self-employed could be an answer to avoiding blending into a big company, as self-employed experts, clever and diligent people tend to do well. So that's the broad categorization of what's going on there, and that's the application possibly to a more sort of modern working environment. But that's a simplistic overview of what was being said there in R.T. Green's reference to the Manstein Matrix, and some people asked if I could sort of explain that a little bit more. Hopefully, that was an explanation that made some sense. I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about this hit that was on the Wagner headquarters. This is something that happened in Luhansk, in Kadivka. So Kadivka is here, Kadivka between Luhansk and Bakhmut, really. There was also an attack at the same time around Melitopol, and there's some confusion when people are referring to that because they happened, I think, broadly at the same time. The destruction was apparently pretty large scale, And there are claims that as many as 200 people were wounded or killed. Some people saying 100 were killed, 100 were wounded. Other people saying 200 were killed. And there's lots of different sort of claims about this. This is a confusion. Ukraine says it destroyed Russia's Wagner military headquarters, regional headquarters, army base in Melitopol. Well, I think this person's confusing two things, and you see that quite a lot on here. The the footage that has come from the Melitopol attack, I can't really show you because it's fairly. That's a cleaned up version. It's fairly dodgy. What I will tell you about that one, again, this one's saying that's a PMC Wagner headquarters. It's not. What I can tell you about that flaming footage, no, I can't see it here. There was one here earlier. It looks rather like that. It's amazing because you have these Russian soldiers walking around with mobile phones. This is it. That's the one. Right, I won't show you that one, but you have Russian people walking around, see HIMARS, Wagner, Melitopol, filming Russian soldiers on the floor, like still alive, just rocking and just like semi burnt, and they're just filming them. Then one guy takes off his coat and puts it on one, and then just walks off muttering something. Like no attempt to get these people to a hospital, to aid, to to get them medical help. Like these aren't necessarily people who are definitely going to die. You can tell it from the footage. It's just amazing. Just walking around like filming it, commenting on the fact that their own soldiers are lying around here in an absolute state. It's pretty horrible footage. Anyway, this is what Ukraine, the latest podcast, has to say about the hit on Kadivka, the Wagner mercenary, definitely the Wagner mercenary one.
I'm going to start with the big news from the weekend, which I'm sure many of our listeners may have heard from other news outlets or our own, which is about Ukraine saying they've destroyed Wagner's HQ in Luhansk. Of course, we've spoken about the Wagner group, the mercenary group that's working very closely with the Russian army in Ukraine, much on this podcast. But the significance of this event is just the scale of it. I should say off the bat that there's quite a lot of confused messaging around this. The Russians are claiming that this strike on their headquarters in Luhansk is fairly minimal, and whilst we've seen footage, they're claiming that it's only killed, I think, about 3 to 5 people. But the Ukrainians are claiming that this is an absolutely major attack, which has led to as many as 200 Wagner deaths. And as I say, that is not independently verified. We're looking into it, but that is the kind of headline that we're seeing here. And the footage is in very, very striking indeed. It shows a hotel that supposedly the Wagner group were using in Luhansk as their headquarters. And it's essentially destroyed completely and is rubble, a pile of rubble. And there's been numerous commentary on this over the weekend. The Ukraine's governor has said that there was an explicit attack on the hotel from Ukrainian forces and the Russians had suffered major losses in the attack. As I say, Wagner have not commented on this explicitly, but Russian officials have said that whilst the attack did take place, that the attack was nowhere near as significant in scale as the Ukrainians are making out. But I think the optical significance of this is as significant, perhaps, as the losses that the Russia may or may not have suffered here. It's a really significant attack, and if one looks at footage of this, you can see the scale of the devastation, as I say, and the fact that Ukraine have been able to launch this strike. Supposedly it's been launched by HIMARS on this scale, on a place that clearly was quite considerably behind enemy lines, is, as I say, very significant indeed. And it comes off the back, of course, Ukraine claiming that they destroyed another of Wagner's bases in Luhansk back in August. So some people are speculating that this was the successor headquarters, and that's what's been struck by Ukraine and effectively destroyed in the last sort of 48 hours or so.
So that's interesting. Somewhere between 3 and 200 people have died, depending on who you believe. He talks about an attack in August. Here's one that's a Wagner Russian base hit back again in Kajivka. at the time it was 10 kilometers behind the front line, um, uh, hiding in a stadium there. And that was back in June. I'm not aware, I can't remember one in August, but yeah, so it's not the first time that, uh, Wagner headquarters have been targeted, and that is pretty devastating. And as uh, Francis Durney says, it's about the optics here. It's about Wagner being here in their headquarters, but very publicly, and it's not a good look. Um, Personally, I think the losses are more important than the optics, by a long margin there. Uh, Although, yeah, they're going to be a bit sort of embarrassed by that, or whatever. I mean, the optics only do so much real damage. Um, Really, you want to be taking out the capability and capacity of the Wagner forces to hit Bakhmut and other areas in this continual assault that we see up and down the lines there. But anyway, yeah, that's Kadivka, and I just thought I'd give that a bit of airtime. And the last thing to talk about, it comes from Shashank Joshi, who is the defense correspondent for The Economist. He's referring to a Financial Times piece here and a graph they have. A nice chart of Ukraine's claimed interception rate of missiles. Russia is having to push its cruise missiles harder. They are flying lower and lower, I am told. Initially, they made 2 to 3 turns. So these cruise missiles are missiles that can be, programmed to go to a certain place, and you can change their trajectory rather than a ballistic missile that you fire it and it comes down, gravity and all that. So instead of 2 to 3 turns, they now have 40, which is more demanding on their guidance systems, as they are trying to, obviously, to evade getting um, intercepted and found by radar and what have you. So this chart is quite interesting. It's not each date here is not equidistant apart, if you like. So that's 2 days of consecutive there, and then we've got an 11-day shift there. But what this shows you is the gap between the attacks. So on the October the 10th and the 11th, we had 2 days of attacks. And then, so they would have fired, that's probably them firing at capacity, or near capacity, and then like doing the rest the next day, and then exhausting their stocks, waiting 11 days to get some back, firing a bunch, then waiting 9 days, firing a bunch more, and then waiting 15 days to fire that huge one on November the 15th. November the 17th, a couple left over. Possibly, I don't know. These are missile attacks, so it won't include drones, possibly. And then we wait 6 days for more, and then basically almost 2 weeks for more. So there are gaps there. Like I keep saying, if you had these on consecutive days, so if you had that attack followed by that attack on consecutive days, guaranteed, Ukraine would have been absolutely screwed over. But they wait because they have to wait. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. They're not waiting because it's intentional. They're waiting because they just don't have the missiles. They have to build more, get more in from strategic reserves left around the country and on ships and submarines in certain places around the world. Anyway, and this line represents the percentage, because we're going up to 100 with the missiles fired anyway, so they can do a percentage line on that too. And it's interesting that sometimes the lower the number of missiles that are sent, fewer missiles are sent, the worse the percentage chance of taking them out is. But then that could be, that's statistics. You've got a smaller sample group, therefore you can skew that more easily. The more missiles they send, the more the whole network of the Ukrainian air defense system is able to, kick into action and do its thing. And the great bit of news is that the last one on December the 5th showed the highest percentage yet. So that's good news in some respects for the Ukrainians going forward. Anyway, interesting chart, and a comment from Shashank Joshi about how the way that they are firing their cruise missiles and using them has changed. Anyway, there you go. Just a few things for you to talk about. Thanks so much for choosing to hang out with me and my channel. Really do appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, and share. Yeah, all the ways to help support my channel in the description below. Books, buy me a coffee, PayPal, all that kind of stuff. You can join this channel. You can join my other channel, or you can, stop joining my other channel and join this channel. It's up to you guys. Whatever you do, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Anyway, see you later.